This is Anish Chauhan and this is Equilibrium Security. It's time to tackle your biggest cyber security challenges head on. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 21 of the Cyber Hot Seat. Now, my guest today, we've spoken about this a few times, and I've been wanting to record this session since I've known our guest. And so, just a little bit of background for anyone that doesn't know, Equilibrium was recently acquired by OmniCyber, and this was really the coming together of two really, really great, like-minded organisations, and the conversation happened really organically. And so, one of the really big appeals was the capability of the OmniCyber Red Team. So this episode of the podcast is called "When Humans Hold the Keys: The Red Team Tales from the Field." Now, Louie, who's my guest today, is Director of Offensive Services at OmniCyber. Now, Louie, I won't do your introduction because you'll do a much better job than me. But tell us a little bit about your background and how you came into red teaming.
Thanks, Anish. Yeah, I mean, Director of Offensive Services is certainly better than job titles I've had in the past. Penetration tester being my favourite. So I've been in cyber security now for probably close to 15 years. My degree was in ethical hacking, and then worked in the industry for a couple of years, and then I've been at OmniCyber, now OmniCyber and Equilibrium for 9 years. I've kind of looked after most things from an offensive capability, so anything from pen testing to social engineering, red teaming, etc. But I think just as most people who get into it, it's curiosities of what you can do. And certainly when I was a kid, I was big into hacking games and modding and cracking licenses so that I didn't have to pay for things. But I think what was kind of the turning point for me was I broke into my very young, broke into my secondary school's Sage Pay, and found out what all the teachers were paying. And at that point, I think I was very much put in the good boy seat to carry on education. And didn't realize until at college you could do ethical hacking and network security as a degree, and just I've gone from there, really.
Yeah, excellent. That's a great little story. As if even if it's a little bit, it describes a slightly checkered past, but you're on the right side of things now, which is great. So red teaming is this term that a lot of organisations use, possibly sometimes incorrectly, perhaps, but some of our listeners and some of our clients and prospective clients won't necessarily, they'll be thinking about penetration testing in a conventional sense and thinking about it in like an assumed breach testing capacity. But when you think about red teaming, or when you're speaking to prospective organizations about red teaming, it's a really good way to test the real resilience of that organization, isn't it? But why is that, Louis?
So red teaming, like you said, is a term that kind of gets thrown around a little bit. For example, we call the internal pen testing team the red team, even though they're not all red teamers. So red teaming is essentially the art of adversarial simulation and emulation. It's instead of looking at a really defined scope like a pen test would at a snapshot in time. So pen testing is great at covering the breadth of an organization, being able to, identify vulnerabilities quickly, etc. And kind of have that pinpoint snapshot in time security posture. A red team is a little bit more fluid, a little bit more continuous. It's to identify real world vulnerabilities or threats to an organization. So instead of it being really, really wide and getting a lot of coverage, often you'll find with red teaming, there's a much more narrow focus, but you go much deeper into that focus. You'll often find as well that instead of covering just a specific scope, like a website or an internal network, red teams cover everything. So that they're designed to test your kind of people, process, technologies, pretty much everything that you have as an organization. So it might contain some elements from what would be in a traditional pen test, like exploiting a vulnerability or performing some social engineering, but it's tying everything together. And when we speak about simulation and emulation, simulation is pretty much using our own techniques and tactics that we've learned over the years in the team. And then the kind of emulation side of it is where we look at emulating TTPs, or techniques, tactics, and procedures of real world adversaries. So somebody like Scattered Spider UK have their own ways of doing things, which are somewhat known about, and we would look to emulate their practice. So yeah, the long and the short of it is that pen testing is very I wouldn't say that red teaming is not controlled, but pen testing is very controlled. It's looking at a very specific scope and a very specific style of testing, and it's designed to uncover the most vulnerabilities in the shortest amount of time possible. You don't care about the noise that you make. You don't care about the people that see you doing what you're doing. It's not designed to have any of that kind of OPSEC nature. The flip side is red teaming, which is it's a little bit carte blanche on the scope and what you're looking at, but ultimately you'll find that all it takes is one vulnerability or one method of entry, and then once you're inside the network, it's being quiet, it's not being seen, it's performing real world adversarial techniques to try and exfiltrate data, to do whatever the kind of primary security concern is, really.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. And what about so you mentioned there's an element of the human aspect to red teaming, isn't there? So why is and that's a big part of the red teaming, isn't it? So that's an entry point, isn't it, to some degree?
Yes.
So why are people still the most vulnerable? I guess we're just infallible as humans, I suppose. But why is people the most reliable entry point for red team operations?
It's difficult.
We could fill an entire podcast with that.
We could fill,
analysis.
with that question. I think, as you've kind of alluded to, humans are infallible. We are the squishy things behind the keyboards, and we are the ones that make mistakes. Technology for protecting against attacks is getting much better. There was a time where you didn't have really, hot email filtering or anything like that. Mimecast wasn't a thing, or it was really 2FA wasn't a thing. It was really easy to convince people to click on emails and do different bits and pieces. However, it's getting harder, so you tend to find that actually the easiest ways to gain entry into organizations now is either through potentially building a rapport with an individual within the organization, whether that be like connecting with them on LinkedIn and striking up a conversation, whether it be sending some back and forth emails to try and convince them that you are of legitimate interest or something like that, and then sending a link to them, or the physical element. I find that we have quite a lot of success within our team of physically going to an office and seeing what we can do from that perspective.
Turning on a bit of charm.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll often find that organizations have great access policies and things like that for remote working. So, you're coming from a new IP address that we don't recognize, we'll block this account, or you're attempting to access an organization from a location that's not registered or anything like that, and then these they're called conditional access policies prevent a lot of these logins. Whereas actually, if you drive to the office and those credentials that you've got or you found on the dark web or that you've stolen, they work, then you'll find that in office environments and things like that, they're what's called trusted locations. So, no MFA potentially, and walk into the office with holding 4 cups of coffee. People hold the door open for you. Just sit down at a desk and plug in. There are traditional challenges that can be overcome by having a little bit more success from a human perspective. So unfortunately, we are by nature just a little bit squishy and a little bit weak, and we make mistakes, whereas technology is less and less likely to these days. Certainly, certainly with the protective technologies that are available to organizations now.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone that hasn't understood the full 9 yards of a red team engagement yet, you're gonna love this part. But I'm teeing you up for the bit I think you want to talk about the most, Louie, and I love hearing this. But can you talk me through a social engineering tactic that kind of worked a little bit too well? And what's the moment where you thought, "Yep, this is going really well, and we're going to get the access we're aiming for"? So the floor is yours, I guess, to tell us that story.
I think I know which story you're alluding to. So we did a very large red team for a insurance firm, probably 3 to 4 billion in revenue a year. So pretty large organization. And there's a couple of ways that you look at it when you start a red team as to what you want to use as your initial access point. So you might go and look at the technological assets, you might go and look at the websites, the servers, etc., the IP addresses that they have in scope, have a little poke at them, and then you start to capture information about individuals. So we've done all of the asset kind of work that we wanted to do, and we want to start looking at people. And when you perform kind of open source intelligence testing against individuals and organizations, you can uncover a whole ream of stuff. And what we managed to do was go buy a load of phone numbers from a marketing service called Lasher, which is great. So bought a load of mobile phone numbers, found a load of email addresses online, and you can, once you know an organization's email address structure, it's really easy just to go on LinkedIn and start building email addresses from there. Connected to loads of the organizations within, connected to loads of the individuals within all, the organizations through LinkedIn. So we have fake LinkedIn accounts and all sorts that can be spun up to look like somebody that would work in that industry. So yeah, went and built a little bit of a background on the business, and we like to look at kind of, I suppose, less conventional social media and things like that when we do this kind of work. Certainly, modern marketing departments are my absolute favorite thing in the world, because they post TikToks and they post Instagrams and things like that. And we found videos of like a day in the life in X business, walking us through the offices, showing us different individuals, what they were doing in the business. Importantly for us as well, photos with lanyards and access passes and all this kind of good stuff. So we built up quite a big picture. And at the time, it was quite a hot topic. It's less so now because there are some protective measures in place. But we performed SMS phishing. And now SMS phishing, SMS is quite an old technology, and phones, as highly technical as they are still a little bit dumb when it comes to SMS. So what you're able to do is send a text message and change what's called the short code, so the name it comes from, to whatever you like. So SMS phishing, you can change that short code to whatever you like. So if I sent you a text and said it's from dad or mum, if you had, it would land in your phone as from dad or from mum. And what makes it even better is that if you have your mum saved as mum in your phone, it would land in the same text message thread. So in context, that it's quite scary in itself. But actually, if you make a text message come from Microsoft and it lands in the Microsoft message thread where you have your one-time passwords, passcodes, and things like that, it can be quite damaging. So we actually sent out a message from Microsoft saying, something along the lines of, and we associated email, associated account and their email address, because we could tie the emails to the phone numbers really easily. Associated account, email address, to ensure this device meets the BYOD policy, please accept the Office 365, usage policy at this link. And we got a lot of hits, as you can imagine.
You can imagine, because it's like we see text messages that look like they come from DPD or Royal Mail or whoever it might be, and that kind of thing. Like you said, it just pops into the chain, but you don't get that many messages from Microsoft, and if you do, they're all genuine. So one that isn't is immediately believed.
Yeah, exactly. So we got a lot of hits come through. We gained some credentials, some multi-factor, etc. And what we tend to do as soon as we gain access to somebody's email account or Microsoft account, I think is probably the best way to put it, we add alternative MFA with burner phones so that we're able to continue to go back into the account whenever we like. And with that, we started snooping around, and we realized that there was some quite strong conditional access policies in place. So we couldn't actually access emails without being on an Intune or a company enrolled device. But what we could do was access their identity provider. And once we accessed their identity provider, we realized that we could gain access to their Citrix environment through single sign-on, similar to things like Atlassian, Confluence. We could start syncing Internet Explorer and Chrome passwords by signing into their profiles on those services, so we could get all the passwords out of Internet Explorer, for example. There's quite a lot of stuff that we could do, and we had quite a lot of fun with it. And we did go into we went into their Citrix environment, and this was it was probably, I wouldn't say a mistake on our part, a bit of bad luck, but one of our beacons that we launched, and for anybody that doesn't know, a beacon is it's a little piece of malware that we use that allows us to have remote access into a server or a workstation, but with the tools that we need to be able to perform further attacks. So it can be used as a proxy to run tools from my machine into the environment. They have their own they have their own they have their own oh, what's the word? It's just run away from me.
I'd like to feel for you, but I can't. I don't know enough about
yeah,
it.
sorry, they have their own they're BOFs, they're called. That's
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they have their own BOFs that allow you to run tooling directly from them as well.
Okay.
So this beacon, we put it on a machine, and unfortunately their SOC team were a little bit on it, and something tripped, and they saw obviously malicious activity from some of the accounts that we compromised, and with this they freaked out a little bit. They pulled the plug on their whole Citrix environment. They said nope, nobody is using this whatsoever.
But at this point, they don't know that you've been engaged to do this, right? They just think something untoward is happening. And it's probably important to pause for a second and say that, look, up until this point, all the other stuff you're doing, gathering the legitimate phone numbers from marketing sites like Lusher, etc., getting all this information, looking at social media, looking at TikTok, nobody spotted any of that. And that's all the stuff that's the kind of, the open source, the intelligence gathering, which isn't that difficult if people are posting it on standard social media, is it really?
Yeah,
but until that point, there's no idea.
No, until you start sending text messages or you start interacting, there's no there's going to be, it's a really upset green kind of activity. It's very hard to spot somebody doing OSINT work and putting together it's putting together just a big picture really, or a sitemap of the organization, and people aren't going to clock that. So yeah, we unfortunately we did get flagged by the SOC, and they pulled the plug on the work from home solution that they had.
Right.
So we thought, bugger, right, we've lost access to Citrix. We've most of our accounts have been burnt. They did actually, the point of contact emailed us and said, can you not send any more SMS phishing? It's not fair. And we're like, well,
you'd really be able to do that in a real situation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Tell the threat actor, this isn't fair. Stop.
Yeah, it's not fair. You're scaring people. So, that was a little bit frustrating. But yeah, we held access to a couple of accounts that I think my favorite. We had one account which was great, and they'd done it, but they had an out of office on. So they'd done it from obviously their phone being on holiday or something like that. Had not checked other emails, had not raised anything internally. So we had a couple of safe accounts that were like that hadn't been burnt. And we kind of thought, what do we do at this point? We pulled conditional access policies, those things about trusted locations that I was talking about, and realized that they had a really nice office in a town up north, and next to that office was a really nice hotel. So we went and booked a hotel room, and you could kind of see from Google Maps and Street View and things like that if you had a hotel room on the right side of the building, you'd be able to look directly into the offices, you'd have direct line of sight, etc. So what we did was we made sure that we had one of the rooms on that side of the hotel. We took a parabolic antenna with us, card printing machine, which we'll come to later, and kind of propped up in the office, put the do not disturb sign on the door, because that would have looked a bit dodgy if somebody walked into that room.
Walked into the hotel.
And we're actually able to do quite a lot from the Wi-Fi. So we could we spun up the antenna, and then from laptops in that hotel room we're able to access the Wi-Fi using the credentials that we had, because bear in mind we did actually have valid multi-factor as well. So even with there being multi-factor authentication, we were able to kind of directly communicate with their Radius Wi-Fi. Unfortunately, once we were on the Wi-Fi, there wasn't a massive amount. That Wi-Fi still, even though being authenticated as a corporate user, didn't have access to a lot of corporate resource that we wanted to look at.
Yeah.
DMZs and things like that
Sure.
that Wi-Fi's are landed in. So we thought, right, we need to actually go in. It's a massive office, it's hot desks. We need to see what we can do. And you spend a bit of time watching people and overhearing people. And the fortunate thing is that we'd obviously picked a great hotel, because this is where a lot of the staff went to drink as well after work. So you
Okay.
sit downstairs, have a few beers, overhear some
Great
conversations.
conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, get a little bit of a feel for when people start, when people finish, when the breaks are, all that kind of stuff. And what we were able to do was kind of get a couple of my colleagues, who are a little bit more smartly dressed than I am, and a little bit more professional than I am, get them to put on their best business suits. Um, and what we had done, if you remember those cards that we saw, those access cards that we saw in Instagram
Yeah.
posts and TikTok posts earlier, we were able to do a really good mock-up of them and actually print them with the individuals' faces on, their names, etc. So these cards look like the real deal.
Yeah.
And what you can do with these access cards is, if we needed to, we decided against it in the end. They're really easy to clone as well. So all it
Yeah.
takes is if you had 30 seconds with an
With
access
a
card,
real one. Yeah.
a real one, you could clone the access to it. And like I said, these people drunk in the bar downstairs, they were leaving, take the lanyards off, chuck it on the table with, next to their pints and their phone type thing. It wouldn't be too difficult to get hold of a card for 30 seconds if you needed to. But we just thought, right, we'll print it, we'll try our best, and
Yeah.
hold a couple of cups of coffee, get the door held open for you. And they had security, etc. That it wasn't turnstile, but they had security at at the front of the office and reception and things like that. But because the card looks good enough and you look like you're tapping it to scan it, or somebody's holding holding the door to let you through, it's really easy to walk into the office. So we got a couple of guys into the offices, set our team's background to look very much like the individuals organization, sat them
Yeah.
down with their laptop out in the middle of the floor, and start having a Teams chat about what the next plan was. Um,
Yeah.
Once you're in a location and the nerves settle a little bit, and you actually find that you've got quite a considerable amount of access to
Mm.
different parts of the organization. Like I said, if you can get into a server room, it doesn't matter about most of the technical restrictions that are in place. It's pretty much game over.
Yeah.
But I had a little look around the offices. We managed to find the blueprints for them, because it was a really swanky building on the council's website. So we knew the layout for the office. We knew where the server room and things like that was. Server room was locked, obviously, when you go and check it, which is good practice.
Yeah.
It's not the old classic one of the server room being propped open by a
Popped
fire
on by a fire
extinguisher.
extinguisher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the server room was locked. So we sat down on one of the machines. Logged into one of the machines, and we'd spent quite a lot of time working on the beacon after it got caught the first time. And so we made sure this time it wasn't going to get picked up. So we logged onto a machine, we dropped a beacon onto the workstation, and the guys left, beacon called home, and we came back and we left it for about a week at that point. You don't want to spike too much suspicion or anything along those lines when you're doing this kind of job. The benefit is with red teams is that they're often quite a lot, they're a lot longer in terms of time length. So
Right.
you do get the opportunity to sit on something for a week or two and say, I've got access. I don't want to spook anybody out. Let's just let things calm down a little bit, and then we'll go back in. While we're in the offices, actually, we were able to look at we're able to get on the compromised accounts emails and things like that, and we could look into Office 365 and see things like shift patterns and working patterns.
Right. Yeah.
And we looked at the ones around the SOC, and we realized that the SOC team were UK and Americas, but they didn't have 24-hour coverage. So there was a quiet spot between about 11 p.m. and about 6 a.m. or something along
Right.
those
Okay.
lines. So naturally, we decided 11 p.m. would be a good time to start snooping around, when nobody was going to be actively looking at the logs. And yeah, with that, we're able to proxy into the environment. Found out it was vulnerable to a really classic Active Directory certificate service attack, so ADCS
Yeah.
attack, ESC1, which is for those that don't know or those that is not technical, it's a zero to hero type exploit that allows you to go from a regular user on the domain or the environment all the way to kind of the super domain admin in about 2 minutes. So we were able to run that exploit, get domain administrative access to the organization, and then we were kind of tasked with looking for some really dangerous information. So things like kidnap for ransom data, which, I mean, I love data. It's one of my favorite things. And kidnap for ransom data, I love even more because, you imagine the implications of that, getting a policy of people who are insured against ransom. All it takes is me and a white van and, go and fire hose somebody into the back of the van. And yeah, thank you very much. You'll pay out. Great kind of information. So I looked at kidnap for ransom data, also just generic policy information. And if I was malicious at this point, you look for the things that are going to do either the most damage or make the most money. So adversaries are quite clever now in how they look at things. If it's a publicly traded organization, for example, what they would do, you cause as much damage as possible because then the stock price goes down. And what you do is obviously, you play the stock market, you put shorts and puts on options chains against the organization. So that's how you make your money. Or, like I said, kidnap for ransom data, you then go and bag and tag a few people and make your money that way. There's lots of ways to make money when you're breaking into an organization. But
and I think it's quite important to just highlight that as well, because some people who aren't familiar with all of this might be thinking, oh, well, it sounds very Hollywood, or it sounds very Ocean's 11 or whatever, but this is exactly what happens, right? There are literally, you boil it down to, it's there for as much damage as possible. So a stock price can be shorted, and that might be done by competitive organizations, if they're maliciously minded, to engage a threat actor to do this. And it does happen. People might be listening to this thinking this is really far-fetched or this is really unlikely to happen, but it happens way more frequently than most organizations realize.
Yeah, it does. And I like the Ocean's 11 because I always say that Red Team is a bit like Ocean's 11, but we're less attractive. We drink more Mountain Dew and eat more Doritos. It's very interesting, but it does happen. So we're obviously tasked with getting certain bits of data, which we're able to pull out. And then what we did do is put ourselves in a position, and you don't actually do it, but put ourselves in a position where we could steal all of their credentials. So, by the time that the SOC came back online in the morning, and yes, they had a few alerts because we, were performing quite dangerous activity. It was too late. All of the credentials would have been gone. All of the data would have been gone. It was very much a smash and grab job whilst we knew that they weren't, online. So, it was a really successful Red Team from our perspective. We definitely highlighted some techniques that organizations don't think of. They don't think about things like, what if somebody puts a parabolic antenna in the hotel next door? What if somebody claims our cards and walks into the office? SMS phishing was a new technique at the time. People hadn't really thought about that. So yeah, it was a good opportunity to try out some slightly more interesting techniques from our Omni/Equilibrium playbook, rather than doing any emulation and being kind of strictly adhering to how a threat actor or how a specific threat actor operates. We get a little bit more, the leash is slightly longer for us, which is always my preferred way to do things.
Of course, yeah, great. And so there might be people listening to this thinking, okay, I don't know if our organization would stand up to this degree of adversary simulation or red team activity. What from your perspective, Louie, what does a good engagement look like? You've just described this was successful from our perspective. From the client perspective, it was an absolute disaster. What does good look like from a client perspective? Like, have you got examples, or have you come across one where actually you just weren't successful because they did all the right things?
We have red teaming is a really interesting one because there's always something to take away from
It's
it.
yeah,
There's always a level of weakness somewhere. No
sure.
organization is perfect. If that was
Hmm.
the case, you wouldn't see things like, even some of the big boys getting popped recently, like
Yeah,
JLR, etc. If
yeah.
organizations were perfect, so there is always something to take away from it. Yes, there has
Hmm.
been engagements where we haven't managed to get red team. Sorry, we
Yeah,
haven't managed to get domain admin. There has
yeah.
been engagements where we ask what's called a witting click sometimes if we don't gain initial access.
Hmm.
So we might say, look, we've committed X amount of time to doing OSINT and
Hmm.
initial access. We haven't managed to get in. Would you ask a individual within the organization to click a
Click on a link.
payload?
Hmm. Yeah.
And with that, we're able to obviously then continue on with the engagement. So
Hmm.
so time isn't it doesn't necessarily just stop when we can't get in or something happens.
Yeah,
We
understood.
we 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 do ask for legs up if we need them, just to make sure that you get the most out of the time spent with us. So
So in order to highlight the weaknesses, right? Because that's what we're there to do.
it,
Yeah.
it, it, it,
Hmm.
exactly. That I think success is measured in lots of different ways, and it's dependent on who you are, and it's one of those things. It's like going to everything for me in cybersecurity is analogized to being at the dentist. It's expensive, it's uncomfortable, but
Hmm.
I would much rather know. And you do get a good feeling when you go to the dentist and they say nothing's wrong with your teeth whatsoever. But if you do go to the dentist and they say, actually, you've got a hole and that needs to be filled, then
Hmm.
I'd much rather have gone knowing that that hole is not going to turn into a root canal,
Yeah.
that's going to turn into an extraction, and get that sorted out there and then, rather
Hmm.
than wait for that pain to occur. So
and
there's
and and to stick with your analogy, if you did go to the dentist and they said everything's fine, you'd be leave a little bit skeptical. You're like, did he actually have a proper look, or did she have an
certainly
actual
certainly
look?
if you're only in the chair for 20 seconds.
That's it.
Like,
Yeah.
so it's one of those, you measure. I think everybody measures success differently.
Hmm.
Success from my side, obviously being on the attacking side,
Yeah.
is rinsing people and getting as much access and as much data out as possible.
Yeah.
But success for an individual in the organization, dependent on what their mindset is, success could also be the same as mine. They could say, right, that was a success that you managed to do all these things,
Because you
um,
found out our weaknesses
because
for us,
we
and that's
found
the
all these
point, isn't it?
weaknesses,
Yeah.
or it's a success because actually we've demonstrated that some of our policies and processes and ways that we work has prevented you from getting in to it. But you've obviously highlighted some other bits and pieces as well, because we've
Yeah.
allowed you to do so by setting up a witting click or something like that.
Okay, excellent. So for some organisations, they may have never gone into a red team engagement before, or they might only just be thinking about it. What should they have? What mindset should they have going in, and what should they be thinking about if they're not, um, in terms of going into a red team? Like I think we've touched on it really. Like be prepared for the fact that we will find something, or we'll ask you for a leg up where needed. What's your kind of advice for that?
It's it's a difficult one. I suppose be a little bit prepared for the unexpected,
Sure.
because
Yeah.
the whole element is to attempt to kind of really get in any which way
Hmm.
possible. You know,
Mm.
uh, and to be fair, it depends on what you put in scope. But I've nicked somebody's laptop off a train before to try and
Right.
get data, all that kind of stuff. There can be a bit of service disruption. We obviously try not to, but yeah, be prepared for people to employ techniques that aren't similar to what you've encountered before during
Hmm.
pen testing,
Yeah.
or social engineering exercises. If we send out a phishing email, we're not going to send out 300 phishing emails and then give you a nice click rate on how many people in that 300 have clicked on it, how many people have opened it, type thing.
Yeah.
It's not designed to be like that. We might end up actually sending only one phishing email that will come through the get a quote form on the website, and then we'll start
Mm.
speaking to your salesperson,
Mm.
and then
Yeah.
we'll set up a Teams meeting with them, and then say, oh, sorry, that Teams meeting doesn't work for me, I can't access it, can you actually access my organization's Teams? And that's a
Mm.
malicious Teams link, and when they click on it, they put in their Office 365 creds, thank you very much. And
Yeah.
we'll still go on the
Yeah.
Teams call with them, and we'll still pretend that we want to buy something, because then you
Yeah.
don't lose the story and you don't lose the kind of facade. But
That's
yeah,
it.
different techniques. I suppose, yeah, be prepared for different techniques that you might not necessarily have seen before from a pen testing or social engineering kind of standpoint.
Yeah. And that kind of just as a kind of roundup as well, I think one of the things that probably why we don't see as many or clients, organizations might not have red teaming in their mind is because it's not necessarily driven that much by regulation. And I think things like, you touched on the phishing simulation and organizations are having that done and they're having a nice shiny report with how many people click links, but then it just stops there, and that's because you know a lot of regulatory requirements are saying you must conduct a phishing simulation, and they're doing the phishing simulation and not doing anything else. So red teaming at the moment isn't really driven by regulator, apart from one or two very sort of early exceptions. It's not really driven by regulation, is it, at the moment?
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, one of those early exceptions being DORA
Hmm.
for the financial sector, so kind of threat led testing. Um, I mean, yeah, it's for a lot of organizations, it's not mandatory, but it is something that's really interesting if you do want to see what your real world responses are like as well. So,
Yeah.
from a pen test, you don't get to test how your blue team responds. You don't
Hmm.
get to, when we do red teams, we look at a lot of what's called threat intelligence. So
Yeah.
what's on the dark web around the organization? What credentials can we buy? Is there any
Hmm.
Telegram chatter about them?
Yeah.
Pen testing doesn't highlight these things. So if you want to know a little bit more about what might be out there from a intelligence side about the organization,
Yeah.
um, if you want to know, want to know a little bit, I suppose, yeah, if you want to know a little bit more about what the real world attacks might look like against your organization, how
Yeah.
the individuals within the organization might respond to a real world attack, what's your kind of business continuity look like?
Mm,
What's your SOC team's reaction? What's the turn if it's the third party SOC? What's their turnaround? Do they spot it?
mm,
All of this kind of good stuff that gives you different um, different techniques and different metrics to measure
yeah.
versus what a traditional engagement brings out. And I'd always suggest to anybody who's maybe had some maturity in pen testing for the last 5 years to 10 years or whatever it is, or you've just pen tested forever but you've never done a red team.
Yeah.
If you're confident in your technical assets, which is what
Hmm.
pen testing is for, and you're confident in the click rates that you get during your phishing exercises, then try and employ some slightly more dirty tactics, which is what red teaming does essentially. It gives you new metrics to measure that you've not potentially thought of. Like I said, what's available out there on the deep dark web,
Mm,
what the SOC turnaround time is, how does the business deal with, if you need to do a war room, for example, if you realize there's an active breach or an active breach has happened and
yeah.
whoever the point of contact is doesn't wish to say that it's a red team exercise, what's that war room look like?
Yeah.
How do the execs handle breach? What they're going to do about notification, the ICO, all of that kind of stuff. So that there is a lot of things to think about that, or a lot of benefits that you get out of it that are measurable benefits
Yeah.
versus traditional testing.
That's a really great summary, Louis, and I think that's it. It makes it way more realistic. It makes you actually test drive some of your policies, some of your procedures. So, I mean, I think for anyone listening, hopefully that was really engaging. I've heard this story so many times, and I never tire of it. I think it's a really good summary of what somebody like Louis's team is able to do. Thanks, Louis. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your extremely busy days and schedule to talk to me about this.
All good, dude. It's one of those ones I always like talking about. I like doing it more, but I do like to talk about it, and certainly in the cybersecurity world, for me, red teaming has always been one of the more interesting topics. So yeah, very, very, very happy to chat about it.
Excellent. Thanks, Louis, and thanks again.
Cool. Thanks very much.